Good day, students. You are welcome to yet another class on geography. And for today, our topic is weathering. If I may ask, what is weathering? What are the weather forces? Or what are the forces of weather that brings about weathering? What are the types of weathering? Then what are the processes through which weathering takes place? Now, what is weathering? Weathering is a gradual disintegration or breaking down of rocks into smaller fragments by the forces of weather. It is the gradual, almost unnoticed, gradual breaking down or disintegration of rocks by weather forces into smaller fragments. We have to take cognizance of some words here. Gradual disintegration, then the weather forces. When you are talking of the breaking down of rocks into smaller fragments, some weather forces or some forces of weather are responsible for this disintegration of rocks. So what are these weather forces or the forces of weather that are responsible? They include rain, they include snow, and it also includes temperature change. These are the three basic factors or basic elements of the forces of weather that facilitate the breaking down of rocks into smaller fragments. So when you are defining weathering, you have to take cognizance of those keywords. It is the gradual breaking down of rocks by the weather forces into smaller fragments. And of course, we have listed those basic weather forces responsible for the disintegration of rocks into smaller fragments. Those weather forces are rain, snow, and temperature change. By the time we progress, you will understand in detail how these weather forces facilitate the breaking down of rocks into smaller fragments. At this junction, we want to move to the two basic types of weathering. There are two basic types of weathering. We have number one, physical. We have number one, physical weathering. Then we also have the chemical weathering. Physical weathering, which is also called mechanical weathering. Then we have the second one, which is the chemical weathering. For the sake of this class, we are going to concentrate, we are beaming our searchlights on the physical or mechanical weathering. If I may ask, what is physical weathering all about? Physical weathering involves the physical breaking down of rocks without chemical alteration of the rocks. Without chemical alteration, without any alteration at all in the chemical composition of the rocks. So physical weathering simply involves physical breaking down of the rocks without affecting the chemical composition of such rocks. Now, what are the processes through which physical weathering takes place? the processes of physical weathering. What are the processes through which physical weathering takes place? The first one is what is called alternate wetting. Alternate wetting and cooling. So you have the first one as alternative wetting and cooling. Then you have this one as frost action. Then you have this alternate you have C as unloading. Now let's look at some of these processes of physical weathering. The first one is alternate wetting and cooling. For this alternate wetting and cooling, this one actually takes place in the tropical regions. During the rainy season, when rain falls, the rock absorbs water and the rock will swell up. When rocks absorb water and they swell up, that is expansion. Then you have contraction. When the water inside of the rocks dries up, of course, the rock will contract. So alternate expansion during wetting and contraction during cooling would make the rock to break up or to disintegrate. So that is how this process leads to physical breaking up of rock into smaller fragments. Then you have the second process, which is called the frost action. Frost action is about freezing. It's about two things. It's about freezing and thawing. Frost action, as the name implies, takes place in cold areas where they have frost, where they have frost. Frost is the same thing as snow. So in cold areas of the world, where rain falls as snow, this is where this process is prominent. So frost action is about two things, freezing and thawing. Now, during the winter, the weather is quite cold. Everything will freeze. The water inside of this rock will freeze. And that will make the rock to expand. So when the rock expands during the winter, when the weather is cold, the rock experiences expansion. Then by thawing, when the ice or the snow melts, that is thawing, then the rock will contract. So continuous expansion, freezing, and contraction, thawing will lead to disintegration of rocks into smaller fragments. So that is another process through which rocks disintegrate in the cold areas of the world. Then you have another process that is called unloading. Unloading is a process whereby an overlying layer is eroded. When an overlying layer on top of an underlying layer. When an overlying layer is eroded, then what happens to the layer below it? The layer beneath it is going to expand, because all this while the underlying layer has been compressed. So by the time the overlying layer is eroded, then the underlying layer expands. So all this while the underlying layer have been contracting. Then when the overlying layer is removed, the underlying layer expands. It has been contracting all this while. As soon as the overlying layer is removed, the underlying layer expands. So when this takes place, the underlying layer is going to break up and is going to be disintegrated into smaller fragments. So these are the various processes through which rocks break up or break down into smaller fragments with the aid of the forces of weather, which I've earlier mentioned. As frost, we have seen snow, how snow has really assisted in the breaking up of rocks. We have seen how rain too assisted in the breaking up of a rock. Then we also have the last one, which is called the temperature change. Is the last process of weathering. Temperature change. Temperature change is a prominent process in the arid regions of the world. Where are the arid regions of the world? We are talking of the deserts. In the deserts that rarely experience rainfall, what obtains in the deserts, they are extremes of temperature. Temperature is extremely hot during the day and it's extremely cold during the night. That is temperature change as one of the weather forces assisting the breaking up of rocks into smaller fragments. So during the day, when the temperature is high, the outer centimeters of the rock expands. Then during the night, when temperature falls drastically, what happens to the rock? The rock contracts. Continuous expansion and contraction of rocks in the desert leads to breaking up of rocks into smaller fragments. Thank you for your listening attention.